You're watching CTS, family-friendly television.
Hi and welcome to Rhonda Live. On the show today, in an unprecedented display of collective outrage, representatives from the Jewish, Islamic and Sikh communities are calling for an investigation into a website for allegedly violating hate laws. The complaints were sparked by a self-proclaimed skinhead website registered in Kitchener, Ontario. The site attacks homosexuals and Jew-infested political parties and endorses the beating of Sikhs and Muslims. Meanwhile, Ontario NDP leader Howard Hampton is calling on the government to take a tougher approach to hate crimes. Today on the show, we'll hear some very different opinions on this issue, and as always, the phones will be open to take your calls to hear what you have to say. Joining us in studio, Bernie Farber. He's the Executive Director of the Canadian Jewish Congress, Ontario Region. Bernie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
How big is the problem of hate websites on the internet?
Well, it's big. I think we have to put everything into some perspective. The web is really this uncontrolled kind of frontier land out there where basically anything goes. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it's a wonderful instrument to have. I mean, without it, I'd be doing research in libraries again, and it would take us days and weeks and months. But with all the good that it does, there's also, unfortunately, bits of bad and bits of poison. And it has become really the tool of choice for hate groups. It has revolutionized hate groups. Why? Because in years past, before the internet, hate groups used to go out into city streets and try and stand in the snow and the rain and the sleet and hand out their material. If 10 people picked up that material, that was considered a pretty good day. Today, they sit in the comfort of their living rooms with their computers online. They tap out their hate messages and potentially can reach tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in the course of a day. So it's much better for them to do that. The expense is minimal. And with a little bit of knowledge, you can make yourself appear as though you are much more than you really are.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's the real danger. The other problem, I suppose, from a tactical point of view, a lot of people say to me, well, people can recognize this for what it is, and but people in Canada aren't prone to dealing with this stuff. They're not going to really get involved in it. And for the most part, that's true. I think Canadians are probably the most tolerant people on earth. But even in a population base of 30 million, there will be a few thousand lunatics out there, crazies, and people who are filled with hate, who are going to go onto these sites, who are going to be turned on by the concept of having permission, if you will, or giving credibility to beating Sikhs or beating Jews or beating Muslims. And sometimes that's all that's needed, is that little spark. And so if 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 people are turned on by that little spark, it becomes a very dangerous spark that could turn into a fire.
Just because it's an extremely small segment of the population, certainly that shouldn't lead us to be complacent or think that it's not a huge problem. Because if September 11th taught us nothing else, it taught us that a very small handful of people with a very extreme view can cause a lot of damage.
Absolutely. And we don't even have to look to September the 11th. September the 11th was the epitome for the world of what that damage could be. But it wasn't all that long ago, prior to September the 11th, that even right here in Toronto, a young man who was involved in a hate group was attending a hate rock concert in downtown Toronto, was filled with hate that evening, and went out after that concert looking for a person of color to assault. And he found a young Sri Lankan immigrant who was a waiter in a downtown restaurant late one evening, just leaving the restaurant, and he beat him almost to death. He was caught and he was sent to prison, a 5-year prison term. But he said, and I gave testimony at this particular trial, that it was that the ability to be able to connect to this hate group that motivated him to do this crime. So, it affects people in a real and in a tangible way. And when we found this particular website that you were talking about, it's a website that is run through a server that's put together by a young skinhead in the Southern Ontario region. And he hosts something close to 25 of these hate sites. And on this particular one, and as offensive as it is, and your audience will forgive me, but it's important that they have a picture of this. Yes. There was a picture of a Sikh gentleman and a Muslim gentleman with arrows pointing. This is a Sikh and this is a Muslim. And at the bottom it says, "Beat accordingly." And brought to you by the Don't Beat a Sikh Foundation. Horrible, offensive stuff. Not only is it hate propaganda of the worst kind, it counsels people to commit an offense, and the offense of assault. And we have to be repulsed by this, and we have to take action to deal with this kind of thing. If we live in a society where we want our children to feel free, to feel the ability to be able to walk down the streets and be who they are, Canadians.
Okay, I want to talk to you more about that, but first we have to take a quick commercial break. We're going to open our phone lines as well. The numbers to call, 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. Back right after this. Welcome back to Rhonda Live. The internet has become a fertile breeding ground for the proliferation of hate. There's hate websites that are popping up every day. The question we're asking today, should the government be doing more to stop this? And can it even be stopped? Our phone lines are open. The numbers to call, 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. We're joined in studio by Bernie Farber. And how difficult is it, Bernie, to shut these websites down? I think most of our viewers, if not every single viewer watching this show today, would be horrified at some of the messages that are on these websites and would want them shut down. But how difficult is it to accomplish that?
You know, it's not that difficult. We have laws in the books, criminal laws, which make it a criminally indictable offense to knowingly and willfully promote hatred against an identifiable group. And just because it's on the internet doesn't mean that makes it any less vulnerable. The internet is as open to prosecution and people using the internet as is a magazine or newspaper or book or anything else for that matter. The difficulty is being able to track the people who are doing it.
Right.
Now, in the case of this one website that we talked about earlier with the with the terrible junk about Sikhs and Muslims, we know the police know full well who's in charge. He makes no bones about it. He's already been charged in London, Ontario with a similar offence. The problem is that, and I think unfortunately so, the authorities have not taken this as seriously, I believe, as they should. Interestingly, we already put in a complaint about the very same website back in the end of September. And do you know that we're still waiting to hear from the Crown attorneys as to whether or not they were going to take any action? That's almost, what, 4 months later. Either they're busy, or if they're not busy, at the very least they haven't taken it seriously enough. And it can be done. The Ernst Zundel website went before the Human Rights Commission. There's also Human Rights Code violations that could be applied. It was shut down. It can no longer operate in this country, so it can be done. But more importantly, there's also the ability to work with internet service providers, ISPs. A lot of these groups and a lot of these people use legitimate ISPs. And we're now working with some of the larger ones to ask them to be good corporate citizens, that when they get these complaints and that they see for themselves that what they are actually putting out on the internet for children or anybody else to access is some of the most vile hate that one can imagine, and that they don't have to have these people as customers. And to their credit, some of them are actually taking action on their own. And those are the kinds of ways that we can, influence this kind of material.
But isn't it difficult, though, if the website originates in another country, south of the border?
It's a little bit more difficult because the laws are different, and that's why it's more important at this stage to work with the ISPs as opposed to use the law. It's easier here in Canada to use the law because we have it. The same law doesn't apply in the United States. But if we work with our colleagues, other Jewish organizations, and work with them to deal with large internet service providers and ask them themselves not to take these people as customers, to make it as difficult as possible for them to find an internet service provider, that will go a long way. It already has gone a long way.
Bernie, I have to tell you, I know this is an old decision, but I was very, very disappointed going back a few years when the CRTC decided not to regulate the internet.
Well, you know, I have mixed feelings about it, to be honest with you. I've worked on issues dealing with the CRTC, and I've found that for the most part, it's a cumbersome watchdog to work with. I much prefer that it be under either the Canadian Human Rights Code, because it's pretty black and white, or under criminal law. The problem with the criminal code is that, as I said earlier, the authorities are not as assertive or as aggressive as they should be in doing some of the prosecutions that we believe are necessary. That said, you know, the government of the day and the Attorney General David Young has made some significant efforts in combating hate crime, so I have to give them some credit. But when it comes to the internet, there seems to be almost a fear of the technology, and we have to back away from that fear. We have to confront it head on and remember that the internet is no different than any other newspaper or magazine out there, and once we accept that, I think it will be easier to start dealing with them here in Canada.
How do you differentiate, though, between expressing an opinion, even if it's an ugly opinion, and when it crosses a line and becomes hate literature?
Well, we have law. The law known as Section 319 of the Criminal Code came into being in the early 1970s. It was tested in 1984 under the case dealing with James Keegstra, the infamous anti-Semitic teacher from out west. The law was upheld, and the Supreme Court of Canada put the test forward as the most vile expressions of hatred. And that's where the Crown attorneys have to come into play. And that's why we have Crown attorneys, and that's why we have these institutions whose job it is to see whether or not certain vile material crosses the line. And you know, I don't think it's that difficult, to be honest with you. I think one can express an honestly held opinion, but when one gets into promoting hatred, be it Holocaust denial or being it ugly caricatures of the Muslim or Sikh communities or what have you, I think people know in the heart of their hearts what's hateful and what's not. And certainly the police and the authorities have the law to use as their guideposts, and they should start doing that.
Is this material so dangerous because it can actually incite people? It can incite hatred.
Well, I suppose, you know, it is said that Auschwitz was not built necessarily by bricks, but it was started to be built by words. And I think we have to understand that words have power, and words can be very dangerous in the long run. Can it incite people to violence? Without question, it can incite people to violence. We know that. We have absolute facts and proof that that has happened. But we pride ourselves in this country in living in not just a free and democratic society, but a tolerant society. And my children and your children and children of friends of mine who are people of color should have the right to walk down their street and not feel that they have to be looking over their shoulder. Everybody has that right, and it's material that comes from the net, this hate material that's so provocative that we have to create, the law creates offensive protection for minorities. That's all it does. And I have to tell you, I thank God that we have those laws, because it makes Canada, I think, a safer place to live.
Should the government be tougher on hate crimes? For instance, if I vandalize my neighbor's car because I don't like the way that he parked it, or I don't like him parking in front of my house, should that crime be treated any differently than if I vandalize his car, let's say, because he's a person of color?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you why. I know there's a lot of talk around this whole issue, but a personal crime is a horrendous thing. It's a terrible thing. The difference between a personal crime and a hate crime is you're not just attacking the person, but you're attacking an entire community. And that's when we as a society have to say, we will not stand for this. In this country, we have certain expectations of tolerance, and we will not permit you to attack an entire community. We have libel laws in this country, very strong libel laws in this country. What's the difference between, I would say, between being libeled personally or being libeled because you happen to be a member of the Jewish community or the Christian community or the black community. And it's a rhetorical question. The answer is that there should be no difference. And that's why we've created those laws, is in order to protect people. And I think that these laws should be used. I don't think they're being used right now as fervently as they could be. But we have to find a balance. I mean, these laws shouldn't be overused either. And I think we do have that balance. But when it comes to the net, I think we're still a little careful and a little worried as to how to apply that law.
Okay, our phones are ringing. Let's go to Monica on line 8. Go ahead, Monica. You're on the air.
Hi, Rhonda. How are you?
Hi, Monica.
Yes, my concern is that a crime is a crime, and hate is a crime. Because with this hate thing, it uses words, and words either kill or build. Right. And once you use a method to destroy another human being, your life should not be respected, because it simply means you don't respect your life. And as a human to a human, if you would like to survive, I see absolutely no reason why you think the other person should not survive. Therefore, when we come across these people, they should be dealt with as criminals, because they are criminals trying to destroy another person's life whom they have not given life to.
Yeah, Monica, thank you so much for your phone call. Is it important that we use the correct terminology?
Oh, absolutely.
Call them criminals?
Well, absolutely, and they are criminals. I mean, we do have laws in this country. By the way, we are not unique. As a matter of fact, the United States is unique for not having these kinds of anti-hate laws. Virtually every Western democracy in the world has some form of anti-hate law to protect their minority citizens. And a lot of this, by the way, sprung from the darkness of World War II, and when people saw what human beings are actually capable of, realized that you just can't allow anything to happen. We don't live in a society where anything goes. We have accepted that there are standards against pornography, that there are standards against violence against women, that there are standards against libel and slander. We have created those laws as a means of protection. And these laws must be applied if we are going to be able to continue in this positive, tolerant way.
Well, we talk about freedom of speech, and the truth of the matter is we do have a certain kind of free speech, but I'm not free to tell lies. I'm not free to libel or slander you. I'm not free to counsel somebody to commit murder.
Well, you know, we live in an incredibly free society. I mean, if you think about it and compare it to other societies, we are an extremely fortunate, we live in fortunate times. But at the same time, sometimes respect has to be legislated. And maybe you can never teach it entirely. Sometimes you have to create laws, because there will always be individuals out there. If we lived in a utopia, we wouldn't have to worry about it, but we don't.
Yeah,
we live in a real world with real problems, and some people out there who are hateful, spiteful individuals. And in order to protect society against this hate and this spite, we have created law to be used judiciously, to be used fairly. And this is a country, this is not an autocracy, this is a country that's run by law, by people with democratic values and tolerant values, and I believe certainly since the hate laws have been out, there hasn't been an overabundance of prosecutions. There shouldn't be, but when applicable, the laws should be applied.
Bernie Farber, our time is gone, but thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Don't go away. We're going to continue this conversation. Take phone calls when we come back. The numbers to call, 416-203-0302 or 905-332-3131. Welcome back to Rhonda Live. Today we're talking about the proliferation of hate websites on the internet. Joining us with his thoughts on all of this, Mohammed Osman Yassin. He's the chair of the Association of London Muslims and is a member of the Hate Crime and Biased Activity Steering Committee for the City of London. Mohammed, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Rhonda.
What are your thoughts? Now, there are a relatively small number of these hate websites that are available on the internet or that are springing up on the internet, but some of the material that they contain is so absolutely vile and ugly. I'm not even really comfortable talking about it. How dangerous are these?
I believe it's quite dangerous. The internet messages, the people that stand behind them are faceless. Simply the law enforcement officers cannot get to them. In this particular incident that we're talking about, they were lucky enough to get to them. Now, hopefully, they will deal with them according to their crime, and they'll set a precedent to discourage others from promoting them. They are indeed very dangerous because they could end up hurting somebody and even promoting hate and genocide.
Has there been a proliferation? Has there been more hatred on the web in the wake of September 11th? Particularly directed against the Muslim community?
Yes, I believe so. Prior to September 11, the media in general was a little bit biased and not careful how they portrayed the Muslim community.
I think that's still true, isn't it, Mohammed?
It changed quite a little bit after September 11.
We still hear those terms, Islamic extremist or Islamic terrorist.
True. In the most part, in London, Ontario, however, I would like to say that most of the media outlets have realized that the consequences of what the media broadcast. We have had some education seminars with about 20 members of the media at the Islamic Center called by the Association of London Muslims. And we have a good working relationship in the sense that we educate one another so that the innocent vast majority of the community don't get burned out for the act of the few bad apples. And they exist everywhere, as you know.
Well, no kidding. I would hate for every member of the Catholic Church worldwide and every member of the Protestant Church worldwide to be judged by the activity that goes on in Ireland.
Exactly, exactly. Hitler was a Catholic, but Catholicism had nothing to do with him. He didn't live to the standard of Catholicism.
So how do you fight this, though?
Well, I believe...
How do you fight such ignorance?
I believe education. As you just said, it's ignorance. So really ignorance is what... hate is an attitude, by the way. And attitude is instilled in the hearts of the youngsters through schools, through their parents' upbringing, through movies, cartoon characters, etc., portraying somebody as subhuman or savage or what have you, in an ugly way. For instance, look at the movie Aladdin and the Magic Lamp. Jafar, the way he looks, I mean, you kind of get the image that if the Arabs are like Jafar, you know. However, this is an attitude that has been instilled in the hearts of the youngsters, and they grow up to become adults. And the internet is just like any other medium. A knife could be used for evil, and at the same time it could be used to help us enhance our life. The media, the internet, is a tremendous, powerful instrument that could advance humanity, but it could be abused as well.
How do you define hate literature? What's the difference? Because taken to the extreme, some people might suggest, well, listen, if we're going to be putting curbs on this, the Bible, you know, particularly the Old Testament, could be taken to be hate literature because, you know, it talks about, you know, Israel's ongoing war against the Philistines, the Amorites, the Hittites, and on the list goes. Or the Quran talks about killing the infidels.
Yes. Well, actually, we have to, first of all, you cannot take an isolated verse from either the Bible or the Quran and interpret it without knowing what have preceded it or what have followed it.
Yes.
There is a reason for every verse, and it was revealed in a certain context. So people must really take that into consideration. At the same time, I believe we all do have principles, and those principles are given to us either by legislative assembly or they're coming directly from God, the master of the universe, who is the God of everybody, who has delivered the same laws that will be applied equally to everybody with transparency. Now, if we all live by the same laws and apply them equally to everybody, then we are not really discriminating. On the other hand, you may say, okay, well, there's a certain issue that I don't agree with. Now, we have the principles, but there are issues. Tackle the issue as an issue. So if there is a Muslim that happened to be a criminal, speak of him as a criminal, not as a Muslim. Labeling is really dangerous because then it implicates even the honest, the innocent ones, you know, as well. Those are the ones that are in your trench, that are on your side. but you're throwing them on the side of the criminal just by labeling the criminal and camouflaging him with the rest of the innocent ones.
Okay, I want to talk to you more, but first we have to take a quick commercial break. Also, our phones are ringing. We'll get right to your phone calls when we come back after these messages. The number to call, 905-332-3131. We're back right after this. Welcome back to Rhonda Live. Today we're talking about the proliferation of hate on the internet. We're joined in studio by Mohammed, and you've been talking about the need to balance freedom of expression, but also, that there's just no place in Canadian society, Mohammed, for the proliferation of hatred.
Definitely.
How do you make that distinction?
Well, I believe, again, we must have a balance between liberty and security. And security of all, security of the nation, and security of the individuals as well, and of communities, peaceful communities that make part of our beautiful country. And that is actually an issue that I would leave up to the law authorities it definitely needs lots of debating and what have you. It's being taken place at the Parliament, I believe, as we most recently, after September 11th. But I believe when you label somebody, when you call for wholesale rage or dehumanizing of a group of people, whoever they are, if you label them, then this is hate. And this is ought to cause somebody to be hurt. And we cannot afford that in our society.
Okay, our phone's so busy. Let's go to Anne on line 7. Go ahead, Anne, you're on the air.
Thank you, Rhonda. No, but absolutely I believe that the hatred can be stopped on the internet, just as the Toronto police are doing now. They're going up to pedophiles that are showing child pornography, and they're being a little bit successful, I believe. And that is protection for children, just as I believe stopping hate on the internet protects children. They can easily find it, and I think instilling hatred in children, it destroys them just as much as anything else. I would hate to have that with my children. I don't believe in it. And I think governments have to take a more active role and look for it and find it and find these people. I know they can do it. They can trace people very easily. My one fear, though, is that they might take it too far because governments do make the laws.
Right.
I mean, you can click on any time. I was looking for something on George Bush, just wanting some information, and all I found were comical, critical sites. I mean, I look up Harris, all I find are Harris-side and Harris-hating sites. Yes. I mean, that's not what I'd like to see stopped. I mean, I found it quite amusing, actually, but it wasn't exactly what I was looking for at the time. But I wouldn't want to see things like that stopped. I mean, general discussion, but hatred against any race of people, I think, is totally wrong. And
thank you so much for your phone call. I still maintain, though, I mean, if you want to get into political bashing, and it's it's the Canadian pastime practically. That's one thing. But I think just because you're on the internet, I think the internet should be held to the same degree of accountability in terms of slander and libel laws as any other means of communication.
Most definitely, actually, the extent of that has been studied by a study that has been recommended for the hate crime or the Human Rights Tribunal. It speaks about this issue, hate on the internet. If I may read a few lines,
sure.
It says, perhaps the most pressing emerging problem for federal lawmakers is the proliferation of hate on the internet. There may be as many as 75 hate groups online. One Canadian white supremacist with an internet homepage told an Edmonton journalist or reporter, "We have big plans for the internet. It is uncontrollable, it's beautiful and uncensored." Now, if that's the kind of thinking that they have, that they can get away with it, it's up to the law enforcement officials to prove otherwise and to protect all of us.
Indeed. Let's go to Al on line 4. Go ahead, Al, you're on the air.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My comment is basically, I hope it's not misunderstood, but because we're such a tolerant society, as Bernie pointed out, do we not sometimes as Canadians set the stage for backlash? And obviously any hate crimes on the internet should be stopped and everything done possible to do so. But, you know, I point out the examples of the groups mentioned by Bernie, Muslim community, Sikh community, Jews. You recall years ago the issue of Kirpans in the schools, or after 9/11, Muslims leadership in Edmonton coming on the national network saying there is no such thing as jihad, when obviously the people that perpetrated 9/11 in some misguided way were looking to their religion as a basis for it. The Jewish community, there are rabbis on the internet promoting use of firearms by Jews as a right outside of the laws of the country. And there's obviously a bit of a crackpot, but still the same dangerous thing. Those issues are never brought up, and I'm just wondering if we're so tolerant of a society to have such a mixed mosaic, I should say, that we sometimes give credence to some of these crackpots that get on the internet and set it up.
Al, thank you so much for your phone call. Your response?
Well, actually, he mentioned the word jihad, and this is the most misunderstood terminology ever, or misused and abused. There's no doubt that religions and religious ideology has been hijacked at one time or another by various political groups and for their special end. It's up to all of us to stop that. And the only way to do that is not to allow them to abuse our beautiful religions and faith that has been delivered to all of us to safeguard us and protect us and give us the moral values and fabric to do that. Jihad in the terminology itself means struggle. And the word struggle could be used to say, if I'm moving to fix myself, I'm struggling. And if somebody is fighting, he's struggling. Now, if they choose to use that word to say that they're struggling to achieve certain goal, then this is their own struggle, that's not mine. So this is an abuse of the terminology, and we should deprive them from its use. And how do you do that? By denying it to them. We do not overemphasize that this word means actual military fight, because it does not. Military fight could be understood as a form of struggle, but it must be regulated in that sense.
Mohammed, Osman, Yassine, our time is gone, but I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It has been so nice to talk to you.
Thank you, Rhoda. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. Don't go away. We're going to continue this conversation. Phone lines open. The numbers to call, 416-203-0302 or 905-332-3131. Welcome back to Rhonda Live. Today we're talking about the proliferation of hate websites on the internet. Joining our conversation, Robert Metz. He's a founding member of the Freedom Party of Ontario. And Robert, you say really there's no such thing as a hate website or even a hate crime. That's pretty provocative.
Well, I didn't exactly put it in those words. You have to separate the word hate from crime. Hate is just a feeling, and a crime is a crime. A crime is an action. So by all means, we must prevent violence from occurring in society, regardless of whether it's against a child, an adult, a person of a minority, or of the majority. And that's the job of government, is to prevent violence and to have a recourse to violence in society. But when you're talking about hate, hate is just an expression of a feeling, and it's not necessarily bad. There are good things to hate. And what happens is that, as well-meaning as these laws are, and as well as it sounds to use it against a really, quote, extreme case, what we really find in practice is that a lot of these laws are being used against very innocent people who expressed an opinion just innocently and find themselves before the Human Rights Commission, as was the case with the London landlord whom I represented before the Human Rights Commission.
What happened?
Well, he had a problem at his apartment buildings in the City of London where there was a lot of mess. He made a comment to the paper that he felt it was his tenants who did the mess. The paper took one look at him. They said, he's white. They took a look at his tenants. They said, oh, they're Asian. Therefore, you're a racist. And on the basis of that, he was taken to the Human Rights Commission. And that's the kind of thing that we find that hate laws are being used for. They actually become an instrument of psychological terrorism, so that the middle class is afraid to say what it thinks about things and is afraid to express itself. If you want to stop hate in society, you have to have freedom. You have to allow people to exercise their vile opinions, counter them, and then they dissipate.
What if your vile opinion, though, is inciting people to violence?
If you're inciting
what if your
people,
vile opinion is that, you know, Sikhs and Muslims should be beaten?
Well, we see that's an abhorrent opinion. And if you're inciting an actual commission of a crime and planning to do it, we already have laws in place for that. In fact, if you make a death threat to somebody, even though you don't have a gun or you don't have anything like that, they can do something about it. We have restraining orders that are placed by spouses against each other just in case they might do something. We have all these things. We do not need to make hate a crime. And above all, we don't need to make it dependent upon hatred towards a specific group, because until we have all these group rights, I never had to think about groups. I just thought of people as individuals. I never thought of them as a member of group X, Y, or Z.
But not everybody does that, though, Robert, because there are some people who would look at a person of color, let's say, for example, and that's all they see is they see a
that's their
nationality,
problem.
they see a group.
So we put them in jail? Is that the answer? I don't understand where you go with that. What are you going to do? As long as a person's not violent and isn't doing anything illegal.
What we're talking about is when it makes the move over to violence, though.
Well, violence is a criminal act. It doesn't matter whether it's motivated by love or hate.
So you don't think there should be a distinction? Now, the example that I talked about with Bernie Farber, where he said, you know, the one crime should be treated much more seriously. Let's say I have a neighbor. I don't like the way where he parks his car, so I go out and vandalize it because I don't like where he parks his car.
So you hated where he parked his car?
I hated where, yeah, I didn't like where he parked his car, and I went out and vandalized his car. Should there be a distinction between that and, let's say, if for no other reason than the fact that this is a person of color, I go out and vandalize his car?
No, not in the law. Shouldn't be any. You created the same damage. The consequence is the same. The person may not even know your motivation.
But the law is very interested in your motivation.
Yes, it is, because it wants to control you. I have an interesting statistic for you here. In the United States, these are according to FBI statistics, 1999, of the number of murders committed. The number of murders, and they keep track of this, and they also keep track of the hate-motivated crimes within these figures. In 1999, the latest figures available, there were 12,658 murders in the United States. Now, out of that many, how many do you suppose were actually hate-motivated crimes? What would you guess?
All of them?
Well, that would have been my answer. I would have said, yeah, all of them are hate-motivated crimes. But no, officially, only 17 were. 17 out of 12,661.
But don't you think there's
do you know why that is?
Particularly something horribly gruesome when a person is singled out for no other fact than you know,
yes, of
the
course.
fact that he's homosexual by people who don't even know him, and he's tied to a tree and beaten to death and humiliated.
That's a crime again. Who cares what motivates it? So what if they had tied him to a tree and beat him and did it for some other reason besides the hate that you can ascribe to him? When you start getting into motivations, you're into very dangerous territory. And to me, the act is the same. The consequence is the same. The punishment should be the same. You're not going to get rid of hate by banning it. And the idea that you know, during Hitler's Germany, you know, that this is an example of how bad hate can get. Let us not forget that Hitler's Germany was a totalitarian state. It was not a free state where they had an internet where you could say what you wanted or where you could print what you wanted. Everything was censored. The government prescribed what you had to think. And in fact, it became the instrument of hatred. And that is what will happen with every government that seeks to ban hatred. It becomes the instrument of hatred. And then it decides this group is okay to hate, this group is not okay to hate. It's okay to hate business people, it's okay to hate capitalists, it's okay to hate politicians.
That's true.
It's okay to hate, I mean, so where do you stop? You're only going to pick these 1, 2, or 3 groups. Then you've elevated those groups above everyone. They're no longer equal with the rest of society. You create hate from the rest of society. And the spiral continues. That's the lesson we have yet to learn from history, is that freedom is the answer. and that reason is the answer. That if someone says something hateful, don't just sit back and go, oh, that's terrible. Tell them what you think. That's a moral responsibility. I do it at every occasion I can. But for people to say we're going to ban them, punish them, shut them up, that doesn't work. It never has worked. It never will work.
Okay, we have to take a quick commercial break. Our phone lines are open. The numbers to call 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. Let's go right to Jerry on line 6. Go ahead, Jerry. You are now on the air.
Hello.
Hi, Jerry. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Hi. I'm kind of surprised. I didn't actually think I'd get on
the hold for a long time, Jerry. Thanks for being so patient.
Oh, it's my pleasure. What you're discussing is something I think if we rack our brains about day in, day out all the time. And I think living in a free society like the one that we do live in, I think we take for granted so many things that we've got here that we don't realize that in some ways we actually probably isolate ourselves from many people and many cultures. When I talk about cultures, I'm talking about not just the cultures of different religions and different areas of the world, but maybe the greater culture of humanity itself. And I think in recognizing the fact that things like hate are a part of humanity, and we like to describe things that are evil and hateful things and crime and things like that as being inhuman. Well, it's probably more accurate if we say that they are human because they're part of us. And evolving, trying to get to a level where we're better than what we are is, I guess, probably ultimately what we're all trying to do.
Yeah, Jerry, thank you so much for your phone call. You know, he brings up a good point. Hatred just seems to be an unfortunate side effect of being human. It has been with us since the beginning of civilization.
Well, that's because we have feelings. I mean, hate is a feeling against something. Love is a feeling for something. That's the only difference. And it's interesting that in the field of censorship, we've generally censored the extremes of both ends of those, the love and the hate. Hate literature and, quote, love literature, as it might fall under pornography or explicit literature or something like that. Those two extreme ends of the human psyche of hatred and love have always been the ones that worry us, but only if they're controlled by some outside authority like the state, where you can't work those things out. Because hate is something against something, when that thing that it's against disappears or changes or is otherwise refuted, the hate dissipates. Whereas that's why kind of love wins out in the end all the time, because it's a positive value. It's a feeling for something. And I always find it interesting, isn't it interesting that politics is all about voting against things, being against things. That's why in politics you find a lot of, quote, hatred. I don't even like to use the word in that sense. I think we tend to be very sloppy with our use of the English language. And when we talk about hatred, we've got to be very clear. I mean, you can passionately, like, I hate intolerant people. I hate, I hate criminals. Am I therefore guilty of hating? It becomes then the government decides it's not the hate that's the matter, it's the object of your hate that we're going to judge. And hatred is not a thing that comes up overnight. It's a genesis that happens in people through their experience. You know, maybe somebody got beat up by somebody of a certain...
Or through their ignorance.
Through their ignorance, certainly. But, you know, maybe someone had a bad experience with someone, and then from then on they think that all people of that race or color are like that. Well, that's an irrational belief. But you can't correct it by edict. You can't correct what somebody feels and believes in their most inner soul and their inner feeling by passing laws and constraining them until they commit a crime. Then all the bets are off as soon as they've committed an act of violence. That's what we want governments for.
Doesn't there have to be some sort of censorship on our freedom of speech? For instance, I can't go into a movie theater, a crowded movie theater, and shout fire at the top of my lungs. Well, I can.
If there's a fire.
Okay, if there's no fire.
Certainly, there's response.
I'm free to do that, but I will be prosecuted at the full extent of the law because I'm endangering...
You'd be charged with mischief.
Exactly.
Right. And that's
endangering
appropriate.
the patrons. I'm endangering that I could cause panic and they could injure themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I'm not saying that one is not accountable for what one says. People who express hatred on the internet, you know, they're judging other people, therefore they will be judged. And that's our job to judge them. That's what I'm talking about, the proper response, is that we should make a judgment, not ban them. If I can confront someone who's enunciating some hatred, and my only response is to ban them, that tells everybody that I don't have the answers to his arguments. That's what I've always learned through any sort of form of censorship. It's so easy to counter an argument and to make the assumption that you know, we have to ban all these sites because everybody out there in society must be so hate-driven that all they have to do is look at this thing and they start going nuts. That's just not true. That's nonsense. I haven't visited any hate sites. The only time I probably would is because I come on shows like this. They're utterly boring. There's nothing there of any consequence or of any substance that people should matter about. Now, if the state gets a hold of these ideas and it wants to start promoting them through propaganda and through things like that, then we've got a lot to worry about.
So what should we do about the hate websites? Just let them be?
Let them be until they commit a criminal act or counsel of a specific criminal activity against an individual, not against groups. Groups are just defined by however you want to define them. You could be defined as a woman, you could be defined as a business person, you could be defined as a talk show hostess. I mean, and all of these things can be groups because we are many things as human beings. We are not just one thing. We are not just a member of one group. You know, a person can be black and be a member of this religion and be a member of that business association, and yet the government would regard each one of those groups as different entities, which they are not. It's a tricky way of getting control of the populace without them really realizing what's happening. We must get away from group rights. The more you have group rights in a society, and the more you look at the group as being a legitimate entity, the more hatred you will have in that society. And that's where, because it's for the process I just enunciated. When you elevate 3 or 4 groups out of the hundreds or thousands in society and say, these ones you can't say something against, you're going to get resentment from the rest, just on the basis of the fact that they're not being treated equally. It's as simple as that. And you can't do that. If you believe in a free society, everyone's equal before and under the law.
Robert Metz, unfortunately our time is gone, but I want to...
Here it goes again.
I know, the time always goes very quickly when you join us. I want to thank you for joining us again today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Don't go away. I'll be right back with more Rhonda Live after these messages. Stay tuned.
Okay.
And that's our show for today. Thanks for watching. Tomorrow on Rhonda Live, we'll talk to author Wesley Smith about his book entitled Culture of Death, The Assault on Medical Ethics in America. And he says the right to die in our society is quickly becoming the duty to die. We'll take a look at all the issues involved. That's coming up tomorrow on the show. I hope you'll join me. In the meantime, have a great day.
You're watching